Hello, my dear ones, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Maria, for those of you that don't know me. On this channel, we talk about spirituality, we talk about psychology, we talk about energy work, we talk about the higher realms, we talk about clairvoyance, higher self, spirit guides, and a full range of metaphysical and esoteric topics. So welcome to our cozy space. I am so happy to see you here. I can feel that at one point so many of you are going to watch this video, so I'm actually really excited to talk to you today. Today we're going to be talking about parts work. Parts work is actually a concept in psychology. It's not really so much a spiritual concept. But I will tell you a few of my tricks and, maybe I'll give you a little bit of a spiritual perspective on some of it as well. But parts work is something that is used a lot in contemporary psychology to heal trauma or help heal trauma, as well as help people work with resistance. Very often when we have experienced some trauma in the past, whether we are aware of what we experienced or we didn't, that trauma will forever be stuck in our body, whether that is our physical body, energetic body, or any of our light bodies, or sometimes it's more than one body, all of the above. And it would prevent us from taking certain actions in the future, or feeling like we are safe in certain instances and circumstances in the future. Parts work is one of my favorite tools that I use on myself all the freaking time. And I definitely have seen a massive shift from this kind of work. Parts work is probably the number one technique. Like if I looked at all of the techniques that, people can do at home that are around self-help, parts work would be my favorite, because you don't necessarily, once you get how it works, you don't need anybody from the outside to tell you how to do it. And it works like freaking magic. It really has that ability to rewire your internal circuits and completely get you from where you are today to where you need to be in order to take that next leap in your life and really shift. So I really love parts work. I have probably integrated, sometimes I integrate 10 parts a week. It sounds really crazy. So why don't I give you like a quick overview of like parts, like what parts are we even talking about? We are very complex beings. I know at face value, it seems like we're all very congruent. We're very, just one person, inside of the body. And, multiple personalities disorder is supposedly a very rare thing. Well, while that type of disorder may be not very common, I guarantee you that there are many different parts of you, many aspects of you living inside of your body right now. And most of them you are completely unaware of. Most of them are in your subconscious. So the trick of this is, unfortunately, you don't just accumulate parts from this life, you accumulate parts from all of the lifetimes that you've lived. So your higher self, as it is going through incarnations, it's planning all of these incarnations, one by one, it accumulates trauma, all kinds of it. At this point, you probably have 1 million pieces plus inside of your psyche. And life is so hard because you descend into a body, your higher self is telling you, hey, sweet pea, here's what I expect from you. Do X, Y, or Z, learn this, that, or the other skill, blah, 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 right? And then it drops you into a body. Obviously, you forget everything, including what you're here to do. You're forgetting, by the way, you don't even remember, like, what is the past trauma that you have accumulated. You remember nothing of your past splits that ended up happening. So essentially, and maybe let's zoom in really quickly into one type of trauma. Let's say that imagine that you're a little child, and You started school and you're, this happy kid and you're getting your first grade, and let's say it's not an A. I don't know. Whatever that is. Maybe it's not an F, maybe it's not a D, but it's not an A. You didn't excel. And say you're coming back home, and up until in that moment in time, like somebody gave you a grade but doesn't really mean much to you, so you're like, that's fine. And then you're handing your mom or your dad, your paperwork, or essentially, and they see your grade, and your mom or your parent is like, what is this? What is this? You're just like, why didn't you not get an A? Let's say that is what happens. In that particular instance, what you would be going through as a child is the massive instance of I'm not enough, I thought I was really cool and my mom loved me no matter what, but all of a sudden I show her the bad grade and she's like, what is this, right? And all of a sudden in that moment, you as a child, you either don't feel enough, you don't feel lovable, you don't feel like you are, you have worth or value. And in that moment in time, what could happen is a split of consciousness, right? So there's going to be this one child of you, the one aspect of you that craves connection with your mother or your parent, right? That just wants to be loved, liked, accepted for who you are. There's going to be that could be one potential split. And then there's going to be another part of you that in that moment of trauma decided that something else is true. For instance, I don't need my mom's approval because I make my own path. Let's say that is what you decided. This strong part of you that helps you get through that experience. In certain schools of thought, they call it the strong suit. This survivor part of you also splits itself. And so essentially you have two parts. The one that suffered and it's undergoing pain and is always going to crave that connection. And the part of you that says, screw it, I'm going to make my own way. I don't care what my mom thinks of me. And then you get dropped into a new incarnation. But both of these parts are still here because they haven't been healed. They haven't been brought into integrity, into unity, into one. They haven't been brought into the same page, right? So essentially they are on slightly different camps. Because technically what I see with parts work is these two parts are very judgy of each other. They're like, don't get along, because from the perspective of the strong part, this part over here is weak. And from the perspective of this weaker part, or the hurt part, this other part is an asshole, pardon my French, and doesn't want to hear their perspective and, somehow is demeaning, right? So it's a little bit of a bully, right? So they don't really get along. They don't want to get along. And let's say that you're faced with something in this life, like a challenge, right? Either of these two parts could be causing you resistance, right? In certain instances. Sometimes the part of you that is not enough could be preventing you from going for that job or going for that, major career shift that you really want. But because you had that part of you, that hurt part of you from like 3 lifetimes ago, that remembers that actually you're not good enough because not even your mom thought you were good enough because of that grade, that part of you could be holding you back, right? Could be holding you back. Or, we can imagine a different instance where this part of you that said, I don't need anybody, I'm cool the way I am, right? All of a sudden could be in resistance to certain things, or certain experiences that you may have around connection, right? For instance, where you would be getting into a relationship and you would be getting to a certain level of closeness with another being, but then, you would never take it all the way, you would never fully commit, because you have that memory that you can't even trust your mother. So if you cannot trust your mother, surely you cannot trust anybody else, right? And so you would never really fully connect with that person, right? So this other part would prevent you from fully connecting, if that makes sense, right? In other words, what I'm saying is parts work is incredibly, incredibly important, because when splits happen, whatever split is created in the traumatic experience, any of those splits could be preventing you from enabling you or preventing you from living the life that you want. So very often when you're experiencing discomfort, resistance, fear, doubt, and a whole range of negative emotions, it's actually not the entirety of you experiencing that. It's a part of you experiencing that. And very often I find that people in their lives, people wouldn't upgrade because a particular part or number of parts would be holding them back. So what do you do in that particular instance? So sometimes, like two things I want to say. Sometimes you already know what the problem is. For instance, like you already are aware that something is really off. For instance, let's say like you are aware that it is the fear of something that is preventing you from, I don't know, moving to another country. Let's say you want to move to another country, but you're like, okay, well, I don't know. Am I going to get a job there? How can I speak the language? All of that good stuff, right? Like when it is a particular fear or like a particular emotion that you're dealing with, and you know what it is, then, the next step is just doing parts work, like when you already know what the problem is. Another thing that I would want to point out though, is very often traumatic experiences that you had in the past are not going to cause like such a big and such a noticeable rift within you. Which means that 99% of parts work that needs to be done is not being done because people don't recognize that something is a problem. And very often that comes via like the warning bell. And how would you even recognize that you need parts work? Is you need to start paying attention to the little voice inside of your head, the little inner critic, or however you want to call it, that little voice that talks to you and is in constant evaluation, judgment around everything that you do. Anytime that voice is not positive about what you do, what you are, or is not supportive, but is instead rendering judgment on what you're doing, or somehow pointing out that you're not perfect or wholesome, or there's something in you that's lacking, it's an opportunity to do parts work. And this is something that I personally, I get like a lot of, it's almost like a hunt now, right? Like once you get like the big stuff out of the way and once you do a lot of inner work, at some point, parts that you need to integrate don't become not so obvious, right? And once you get to that point, catching yourself thinking a thought that is not remotely positive is your opportunity to do parts work. So if I get a thought that I feel kind of could describe me, meaning like it feels characteristic of me, but is not a positive thought, I almost like fish that thought out and look at it as if it was a part of me. I sit it in front of me and I do parts work with that. And then I integrate that part of me. And, that thought, that negative thought never comes back. And this is like one of the life hacks that I wish everybody was using. I wish everybody was doing that, because I think we would all be much happier if we were to do that, and we would not be stopped from, living our purpose if everybody just spend the time to do parts work. Now, I think Teal Swan teaches parts work amazingly well. So if you don't know who Teal Swan is, you should Google it right now. She has a book called Completion Process. Love her. Now, since you showed up, I can also tell you how I do it. So with parts work, right, it's really important to essentially take the part of you that is experiencing that pain or is in resistance to whatever you're trying to do, that part that's causing you an emotion. First, you want to focus into that part. And you would almost want to imagine that part is sitting in front of you in a chair. And at first you want to focus on that part and imagine what it looks like, or see what it looks like if you have your third eye open, right? And you would notice, is it big, small, is it black, white, what color, what shape, is it humanoid, like is it like a little bubble, is it the square, what is it, right? So you want to definitely look at that part. But then, once you've kind of like looked at that part, then you want to merge with that part, right? And parts work is all about changing perspectives. So very often when parts work is done in a physical space, because I very often do it etherically in my head, so to say, which is kind of like the concept that I'm going to be explaining to you today. but very often for people, they would actually literally put out 2 physical chairs, right, for this exercise. And in one chair, you would sit as that broken part of you. And then on the other chair, you would sit as your higher self, a higher aspect that kind of like just understands the bigger picture, right? And so when I find a broken part of me, I sit it down. I sit her, him down. They generally have a gender, which is kind of cute. And a gender, an age, like that part of you, like you should totally try to get to know it first, right? And once you merge with that part, it's really important to let the part speak their truth, because the number one most important thing is that part never really gets heard, because there's generally a dominating part of you that somehow is brushing this other part under the rug. And so being able to listen to yourself is actually the prerequisite to having a successful parts work session. So once you fully understand where this being, where this aspect of you is coming from, and very often they would be very emotional about, what you're going through, right? Whatever that is, they may be emotionally upset, they may be anxious, they may be, enraged, whatever that emotion is, right? They tend to be emotional, and they tend to be a little bit stuck in their own little bubble. Like these parts, in my experience, don't always see the bigger picture. Hardly ever do they see the bigger picture, which is precisely why they're acting the way that they're acting. So you would want to hear them out. And then you would essentially imagine, right, that you're standing up from that virtual chair, or you can stand up from the physical chair if you're doing this physically, and you would want to sit into the other chair opposite to that part of you as kind of like the higher aspect of yourself. Very often, if I'm, getting into the zone of my higher self, for me, it's extremely easy to connect to my higher self. But if it wasn't easy, I would activate my crown center. I would imagine that my crown center as like a spiral of white light, and I would connect upstairs, high up, to my higher self. And then, essentially, once you establish a connection with your higher self, it's like a two-way street. So your higher aspects start sending you signals, right? And so essentially, once you establish this channel of communication, it's white in color. You're able to embody your higher self to a large degree, actually. And so you would sit in another chair as your higher self, and you would observe this part of you that's hurting. And very often, you would want to ask that other part of you some questions, or you would want to provide feedback, because from this aspect, your higher aspect of you, you may start getting insights about what this part is all about. What is its purpose, its role, when potentially it was created, right? Like I get all kinds of information and downloads from my higher self about, the big why about this part. Some parts have been with me for 3,000 incarnations. Some parts of me have been here for three incarnations, right? So like they're actually also, the depth of how ingrained they are in you and how often they come up is also quite different. There's like a pretty large range of that as well. So it's kind of interesting. So once your higher self is able to see that part for what it is, but also listen and, truly hear the grievances of that part, you would want to switch back into the part that's hurting, or this part that needs to be integrated. And it's almost like you would want to pass along the message from your higher self. It's kind of interesting once you do this exercise. Once you switch perspectives like that, they don't always remember or know what the other one said, which is kind of like the crazy part. So you also have like another part of you is going to have to act as like an interpreter or a translator, or like the mediator, the in-between. And you can also do it with a friend, where your friend could be the mediator. But in this particular case, I just always, it's me, myself, and I. So I don't have to use anybody else. And so essentially, you may need to change perspectives a few times here, because it's a little bit like a Q&A session, right? Where your higher self may be asking questions and this other part may be responding. Like your higher self, it's, although your higher self tends to understand this other part, right? But it's important that the entirety of you does, right? And, you may be switching back and forth, because this part, the broken part, may also have messages, like some very specific messages for your higher self, because very often I find that this other parts, the smaller parts that need to be integrated, feel either judged or somehow less than, and that may get that part to act defensive or, flippant or just angry. So, all of them have obviously different personalities, because these are the different aspects of you that got created under very, very different circumstances. They got forged under very different temperatures, if that makes sense, right? And so you would have to do a few of these labs depending on the part. But very often, once your higher self, once the other aspect of you that is in charge understands the smaller part better, there are two important things to understand, or really one that is most important, is why is this part acting the way it's acting? Like if it's holding you back, trust me, like no part of you wants to physically harm you or actively harm you. Every part of you is trying to protect you in some way or serve you in some way. It's just whatever they are doing in the moment may not be, or like whatever their version of protection or serving you may not actually be protecting or serving you in this particular incarnation, if that makes sense, or in this particular instance, right? So they're actually in the way, whereas they're thinking they're helpful, if that makes sense. And so I find that the moment this, your other aspect, your higher aspect, explains to the smaller part of you that they're actually in the way of your collective success, and here's why, this other part is undergoing like a massive shift, because ultimately they all are working and playing for the same team, right? And the next step from that common ground of understanding, wait a second, you're trying to help, but you're actually hurting instead. The next thing is the assignment of new responsibility, because every part of you, every fraction of you has a purpose, a meaning, something that it's doing on a day-to-day basis, right? It may be some parts of you are criticizing you, and that's what their activity is. Some parts of you are cheering you on, right? Granted, you probably wouldn't want to get rid of those, but for the part that is always criticizing you, what it needs, once it sees the light of day, and once it sees that this much criticism could be detrimental to you, all it needs is something else to do. So it is up to your higher self to figure out what is that thing, right? What is that aspect that this part of you needs to be assigned, right? So your higher aspect generally says, okay, like instead of criticizing me, maybe do X, Y, or Z, maybe help me make friends or something. You can assign literally anything that you think is positive to that part of you. And then once the assignment happens, this smaller aspect of you that needs to be integrated needs to accept that as their new role. And once they're in acceptance, what I see happening actually, and if you don't see it happening naturally, this is what you should start imagining, that this part of you that accepts this new role is starting to almost like lift up and rotate and almost like spiral around the rest of you, the entirety of your light bodies, and it's starting to integrate, and it's going to be magnetized in exactly the place where it's supposed to live, because like it belongs somewhere, this part of you. It's not supposed to be separate, right? And so just imagine it kind of like in a vortex, kind of like rotating like that, and then it would naturally just like get sucked into the entirety of you, and that is the integration. And really, it works every single time. It can help you fix probably 99% of your problems that are psychological problems is parts work. Because generally it's just a part of you that is not on board with your direction for one way or another. I hope this made sense. It's kind of hard unless I give you an example. Should I try to figure out how could I give you an example though? I mean, there's just so many parts. And so many, honestly, like, oh, here's another important thing that I need to tell you. Sometimes when you're trying to do like a big upgrade in life or a big change, there would be more than one part that would be in resistance to that. And I mean, we're talking like massive change here, Like for instance, let's say that you are, I don't know, unhappy in your marriage. Hi, lady. My cat's arrived. All right, so let's say you're unhappy in your marriage and you know it's time to get a divorce and move on with your life. There could be dozens of parts of you that are not on board with this, although you know in your heart of hearts that this is the right decision. So it is very important, if you're doing something life altering like that, to allot enough time to do parts work, and maybe do it more than, you know, once, do it a few times to make sure that you're addressing all of these parts. So essentially, for instance, in the marriage situation, you know, one part of you could be really scared of being alone, and that could be a fear. Sorry, my cat is going crazy, so I hope I apologize in advance. This little munchkin, she wants to be in the camera today, and so, you know, she's just gonna be hanging out with us. So, you know, say there's a part of you that really hates being alone, or is worried and afraid of that. So that could be a part that, you know, you may need to integrate. There could be another part of you that is afraid of being judged for not making a marriage work. There could be another part of you that is seeking approval from your parents, and you think that staying in the marriage would get you the approval from that parent, or, you know, that you're seeking approval from. There could be another part of you that may be worried and afraid that, darling, there may be a part of you that is worried and afraid that you may not be able to make a living on your own, right? So all of these parts need to be factored in. So all I'm saying is, don't stop, right? In other words, if you've integrated a part, what you should ask is, hey, is there another part of me that is still in resistance to that which I'm trying to accomplish, to that which I'm trying to do? And I think the worst I had to deal with was 12 splits for something, like 12 parts in one go, like 12 parts were revealed. I love my cat, but she's being really moody. Darling, what are you doing? We're trying to talk to people about parts work. Do you need parts work? I think she needs parts work. I think she needs to integrate the parts that's craving for her mother's attention. Anyway, so if you love parts work, let me know in the comments. Let me know if this was helpful to you at all. I hope this made sense. And yeah, I will see you in the next video. Sending you so much love and a big virtual hug.